here we are. This is S.x Love Psychedelics, and I'm your host, Dr. Kat. Bringing you psychosexual conversations that will leave you intellectually turned on and hungry for more.
Now, there's so much in this social media world of the use of the word trauma. And as a trauma therapist, there's this part of me that's like, yay, people are becoming more informed about how we're not broken. It's literally this inner complex structure that's trying to keep us safe. And then another part of me is like, ooh, I'm seeing people literally say, yeah, that's my trauma. That's my trauma. And is that causing a disempowerment of us being able to take ownership and do the deeper work to figure out what the vulnerable need is at the end?
Yeah. It's been really interesting. When I started the Phoenix Project, it was in 2018 on the heels of Me Too. And when I was talking to investors or potentially, people to like be part of the platform that we were building, I would hear, without like a doubt, 4 out of 5 times, someone would say, well, I don't have any trauma. I don't know what this trauma thing is you're talking about. It's like, I get it. Like trauma, people have trauma, but I don't understand. I don't think that's relatable. Right. Then the pandemic happens and all of a sudden everybody's talking about trauma. Like, it's like this sudden shift in the last 3 years in consciousness and same thing, like the conversation and normalizing, like, yes, we have trauma and there's big trauma and little trauma. And let's, like have these really beautiful informed discussions. And I worry too, that it's just getting painted on everything. It's like everything is trauma. And it's like, well, no.
So let's start there.
Everything is trauma.
How do you conceptualize trauma to help people to really anchor into that?
To really anchor in. That's a good question. I actually haven't thought about that in a while, but I think it's like basically when something has happened too hard, too fast for the body to actually understand, or the brain, like it's really quick and it's almost like that whiplash, right? Like, okay, that was jarring. That was something that like took you out of your experience. That's something like shifted the way your brain, processed information, especially like we were talking about the formative years. So much deep trauma can happen in those years and impact you as a full-fledged adult, But there's also like, I understand that experiences can feel traumatic, right? And I don't want to, erase that experience for people, but it's not the same as like, I've had this really hard trauma, like this incident happened that shifted, like suddenly my life went from like, there's me before the trauma, me after the trauma. And there's this massive difference, right? And how I'm relating to the world, how I'm feeling in my body, how I'm dealing with stress, et cetera, right?
Yeah.
And life in itself can be traumatic. Like
there are things
or distressing. Exactly. Totally. Yeah. Exactly. It's like, and I have a 19-year-old daughter. And so Gen Z is all like trauma. Everything is trauma. Like everything is trauma. And I was like, at first I was like, damn, this generation's like hella talking about trauma. Like I'm kind of into it. And then I was like, Kayla, like, because your professor didn't email you back, that's not trauma. That's annoying and frustrating, but like, you don't need to trauma bond with your peers about that situation, So it's like understanding like, where's the middle ground? And I think we're at like a really interesting place overall about finding middle grounds and not going to extremes, collectively. But yeah, for me, it's like, it's this truly like index event. And obviously you can have big traumas and little traumas. They don't all have to be like a pandemic or an assault, but they there's a spectrum. They exist in that, and they shift the way that you live, right? The way that your brain even processes information.
Yeah, this part has this new perspective about how much more danger cues there are in the environment. Yeah.
Absolutely. But it's such an interesting conversation and like question, because a lot of like pop psychology, Instagram and TikTok's psychology is like really throwing out that trauma thing.
I know. Yeah. I like to add to that too, that there's distressing events that are annoying and hard. And then also the trauma is an incomplete process of the nervous system and the brain to be able to process through something. that causes like I like to use the word short circuit. That's not exactly what's happening, but it is like a zip, zip, you know,
it's a glitch.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. Yep.
It's working as it needs to, but it's not the fluid processing.
Totally. Like something has been shifted, right? Like it's not on the same page or wavelength it was prior to said event, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think there's, you know, adding to the trauma conversation, like there's PTSD and then there's CPTSD. And I'm sitting here like with my popcorn being like, when are we going to really dig the fuck into CPTSD? Because that is, even like in the psychedelic space, that's a different animal to work with, you know? It's a different way to get into that spiral of the traumas and start to get them to unravel in the body, the nervous system, everything.
Well, that was fun. Thanks for tuning in, lovers. And if you want to experience more ecstasy and sexual liberation, head over to sexlovepsychedelics.com and learn about how you can join me for any one of my online or live events. And while you're there, grab my free guide on sex and psychedelics. Remember, this podcast is for entertainment and educational purposes only. Please contact your healthcare provider and local law before pursuing any of the products or psychedelics discussed. And one final note here. I make this show specifically for you. If you're loving the show, then be sure to leave me a review in iTunes or Spotify to let me know. Happy to be here and happy to serve. I'll see you next time on Sex, Love, Psychedelics.